next panel will deal with the ways climate change and sustainability are influencing the way we raise and grow our food. And what is the role of leading organizations in this aspect? I am happy to welcome Galit Ofer, Head of Environmental Law, Cleantech and Climate Change Practice at Shibolet Law Firm, to moderate the panel. Please welcome this panel's participants: Natasha Santos, Vice President, Head of Global Stakeholder Strategy and Affairs at Bayer; Roche, Senior Investment Manager at Yara Growth Ventures; and Erik Bruun Bindslev, Director of Value Creations and Partnership Building at Vaekstfonden.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us. It is my pleasure to host this panel which deals with some of the most important issues in the modern agriculture industry: issues of climate change, sustainability, and social responsibility. My name is Galit Ofer. I'm a head of environmental law, Cleantech, and climate change practice at Shibolet Law Firm, and I'll be the moderator of this panel. So I'm very happy to host you at this Zoom conference, and so that all of us will know you better, please introduce your organization shortly. Let's begin with Natasha.
Thank you, Galit. So happy to be here with those great panelists and with you. My name is Natasha Santos, as you mentioned. I'm a vice president at Bayer. I'm based in Germany. Bayer is a life science company who is active on the fields of agriculture, pharmaceuticals, and consumer care. And today I will represent our agriculture division and have this exciting conversation about ag tech and the future of sustainable agriculture with all of you. So thank you very much for inviting us.
George.
Great. Nice to meet you all. I'm Roche. I'm representing Yara Growth Ventures, and we are the venture investment team of Yara International, the Norwegian-based crop nutrition and agriculture company. So at Yara Growth Ventures, we invest directly in startups and in funds related to agriculture and green hydrogen. So enabling transitions for across the value chain, especially in agriculture, for new products that you're putting in the field, optimization of the entire supply chain, in-field decision support, and new means of financing.
Erik.
Hi, Galit. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Erik Bruun Bindslev, and I work at the Danish Sovereign Investment Fund, which is a fund that provides lending and investment capital to the Danish ecosystem of startups, right from pre-seed to growth. We also invest in fund of funds globally and in Europe and Denmark in particular. And I am at Vaekstfonden as the Director of Value Creation and Partnerships, which means ensuring that we have a new strategic alignment across transition power into the new circular bioeconomy. And I'm also creating a global ecosystem outreach to ensure that we have a broader spectrum of actors globally coming to Denmark to power the green transformation of society.
Okay, thank you. So we have representatives from different kinds and sectors in the agriculture industry. We are here to talk about agriculture and sustainability. Agriculture is an area in which sustainability is not only a buzzword or a nice to have, it is an existential need. Therefore, it is the challenge and as well as the opportunity. So on the one hand, needless to say, growing food, feed, and livestock is crucial to the survival of humankind on this planet. On the other hand, industrial agriculture has an immense impact on the climate. So your organizations take a crucial part in designing the future of industrial agriculture, and therefore we are here to discuss this. Natasha, hi, I will start with you. So can you tell us what are the ways that Bayer contributes to sustainability, takes into account climate change principles?
Of course, thank you for that question. For us, we are focused on commitments and on actions. 3 years ago, we published commitments that embed sustainability into our business, focusing on main challenges as food security and climate change, of course. Our goal is to reduce agriculture's environmental impact and ultimately realize a carbon zero future for agriculture focusing on innovative solutions and services that reduce GHG emissions of crops grown in the field, and even help farmers sequester CO2, for example, and generate revenue from those practices. As an example, I am particularly proud of our investment in short start-to-corn systems for small or for large-scale farmers in places like Mexico or the US, for example, because this system can increase resilience and can help reduce crop loss due to its improved standability, its short corn, and it can increase environmental sustainability as well by reducing requirements, for example, for land and water use, and optimize key nutrients like nitrogen. So it's a good example, on my opinion, how to synergize adaptation and mitigation to climate change. And when considering, for example, biodiversity-rich ecosystem, I can share an example of our biocarbon initiative in Brazil, where we collaborate with farmers so they meet preconditions such as observing the National Forest Code, respecting preservation areas, in addition to implementing climate smart practices that reduce emissions and capture soil carbon in the soil. We already have more than 2,000 farmers in this initiative, more than 250,000 hectares, but we can and we believe we should do much more, particularly in the collaboration areas, the partnerships areas. We keep working on building capacities as we push towards a system-level transformation on agriculture, the ecosystem that we want to build together with partners. For example, we are engaging on a number of collaborative schemes that already look at scaling up climate smart and nature positive practices in agriculture and make them ready and available and easy to use, low cost and easy to use for farmers. For example, recently we have joined an initiative called Living Soils for the Americas. It's supported by the renowned soil scientist, Dr. Ratan Lal. It aims to empower farmers, ensuring guidance, incentives, and third-party validation to implement soil health solutions in this case. Additionally, the platform intends to help with model validation and policy advice so countries can reach climate targets and increase climate resilience of agriculture sector, as you mentioned. Is not only a need, it's something that is key for the agriculture sustainable future. So fostering soil health to maximize carbon sequestration, to increase food security, and in this case of this collaboration is aiming and is active in more than 7 countries of the Americas. So those are some of examples of our current work stream in innovation and partnership. And we are not pretending that our work is complete or that we thought of everything. We aim to expand our partnerships and lend support with important groups around the world so we can now uncover new networks and models that can make a difference and contribute our resources so we can scale up our collective positive impact, Galit. So thank you for the question.
Thank you. It's very impressive. I would like to refer the same question to George. So what is the role that your organization plays in the field of sustainable agriculture?
Yeah, sure. So I'll speak to Yara Growth Ventures versus Yara overall, because it's a big multinational. There's a lot of different initiatives, and I think relative to some other companies or other industries, for sustainability is kind of core to Yara's transition as a company. And so Yara Growth Ventures is kind of one of the pieces that's building a strategy for the future and being kind of a tip of the spear to see how the industry is changing and investing and helping create new industries overall. For instance, in green hydrogen, you see a lot of transition from traditional energy sources towards more alternative energy sources and the greening of that entire space. And that has massive applications in both agriculture, but also other industries. So that's one of the areas that we're investing. The other area that we're investing in is in agriculture, just pure play agriculture. And I'd say that the core thesis that we have is related to no compromise farm. And by this, we mean to say that we don't believe that the key stakeholders, the farmers, the advisors, the retailers, the big agricultural companies are going to be willing to compromise on their yield, quality, or profit in order to meet sustainability demands. But these sustainability demands are going to be coming regardless. So that's kind of core to the lens that we use when evaluating new investment opportunities, is what are those outsized impact but relatively low effort changes or disruptions that are going to enable these stakeholders to transition towards more sustainable practices. So basically every investment that we're looking at is with that lens of how do we help transition these stakeholders towards more sustainable practices. And that's leading us to invest in those first four areas that I mentioned in the intro, but related to new products in the field, but not necessarily just crop nutrition or just protection, more around plant resilience, related to better decisions in the field. If a grower, especially around crop nutrition, is able to use it more effectively to pick the right products around the 4 R's of crop nutrition, you're going to get lower emissions. Optimizing the supply chains, that one's pretty clear. And then new means of financing. And I think the financing side is where you start to see sustainability take a bit more broader definition related to the overall wellness and well-being of those stakeholders in the supply chain, especially the growers. And so those have been the areas that we're looking at.
Thank you, George. So Erik, so you heard Natasha and George, and I'm sure because of the short conversation that we had before that you have a few things to refer to in what they said. You are the representative of a governmental fund, so you have an observation of the market from 30,000 feet high. And I would like you to share with us your interesting reference to the changing the paradigm of climate investing.
Sure. Thank you, Galit, for that particular sort of question or inviting me to elaborate. I've been trying to build sustainable food and drinks businesses for a good 20 years. Before then, I was part of a different system. I was shipping commodities from the Southern Hemisphere to the Northern Hemisphere and back again as packaged products. So very much I have a crucial awareness, and I think with the consciousness comes responsibility, which was one that I began to work on when I was in my early 30s. Now 20 years later, there's a couple of things that I have really learned, and that goes down to investing as well, is that we have to be careful not to create the same linear systems that has really caused the tremendous problems that we are facing as a planet, number one. Number two is that if we are to face them, and we have to really innovate and also use our investment hats properly, then we need to think about the mindset that we apply to it. And by that, I mean that we have to move from the linear to the complex. We have to move from the proprietary to the collaborative. And we have to also, I think, forgive the business models that have really fundamentally created the huge problems. We have Bayer in the room, which is, an ag chemical company, which has created so much destruction in the hindsight of climate, not in the hindsight of what those business models were set out to do, which was create value for the shareholders. So I'm really happy to hear that Bayer is now focusing on nature positive rather than nature negative and human negative, because that is the mindset we need to create. And also I invite Bayer also to collaborate on a broader field with other actors in the ag space, because we have very limited time and we need to really systemic changes which will really affect our planetary ecosystems. So when you put that down to investment hats, is really go in with a more systemic approach, see how those investments fit into the bigger picture, be it national or international, and put a couple of extra lenses on. Perhaps ask a few more questions of yourself also before you make the investment.
Okay, so going again to Natasha. I'm sure, okay, we'll talk about what Erik said later, but now I would like to ask you, so sustainability is more than just environment, the 17 SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. So they state many further demands, such as gender equality and human rights and diminishing hunger and maybe reducing poverty. So do you take into account other principles, such as those when you do sustainability in Bayer?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Thank you for that. And I am responsible for, we talk about it at the beginning, I'm responsible for the stakeholders affairs and strategic partnerships in our organization. I'm Brazilian, I was born in Brazil. Actually this week, I was reading news in my country where unfortunately, because of COVID and because of the dramatic economic issues that we're having there and in many parts of the world, particularly in low and middle income countries, we see people going back into the poverty line, and sad news such as people going to the garbage to find food because there's the only way they can feed their families. And I've seen this through my history, actually, since my mom was a single mom. And so just going back to how we need to thinking about investments and partnership, I completely agree. And that's always what I have in the back of my mind. And another interesting thing as well is, and I will mention here on answering your question, is that we need to look at solutions that fit the needs of specific countries and regions. We need to have a local approach for solutions, for sustainable agriculture and for food security and for environmental sustainability. We need to look what is the reality of that country and then think about solutions that will target the needs of farmers and the needs of the countries. Because when you have a lot of pressure in terms of poverty, you need to have innovative. You need to think about technology, but you need to have innovative ideas on how to solve those very critical issues that still are very important for us around the world. And then that links with the answer of our question today that you asked me, Galit, which is if we look at beyond environmental sustainability, I would say yes. Environmental sustainability has the three pillars: social, economic, and environmental. And for us, they have all the same level of importance. So one way that we look, and one of the investments, we all know that food security is becoming again more and more critical, as I mentioned. There is a worrying reversal of a previously positive trend. The SDG 2, zero hunger, is at risk again. We have seen the reports around the food security and nutrition, that currently the projects for 2030 is that we're gonna fail our targets by 660 million people by 2030. So they will be far away from zero hunger. Around 30 million of those will go hungry due to the lasting effects of the pandemic. So as I mentioned, we look at the three pillars the same way. So we have three commitments that look at our broader portfolio, not only in agriculture. The first one is around agriculture, where we want to support 100 million smallholders farmers to produce enough food to feed themselves and others and to improve their incomes. We have a commitment on 100 million women with access to family planning, which also means empowering them, which is critical for the socioeconomic development of the domestic national economies. That's done in partnership with our Bayer Foundation. We want to increase the availability and affordability of our pharmaceutical products via equitable pricing and patient affordability programs. Our ambition is to reach 100 million people. We want to expand access to everyday health for 100 million people in underserved communities, particularly on rural areas, on the places that we have investment on. And then just an example to end my answer here to you, an important evidence on how we are creating positive impact on the ground is our Better Life Farming Alliance. Those Better Life Farming allows farmers in low and middle income countries to transform their farms into sustainable business. What I think is relevant on the Better Life Farming Alliance, the novel component on it, is because those Better Life Farming centers that we create, they connect up to 500 smallholder farmers that were previously fragmented and isolated smallholders in a region. For example, our largest investment is in India, and we connect them to products and services and corporations and NGOs. So in 2021, the Better Life Farming Alliance had established 900 Better Life Farming centers in India, Indonesia, and Bangladesh, reaching 300,000 smallholders. And this is connected to our 100 million targets by 2030. We are already expanding in other regions in Africa, in other countries in the Asia region. Thank you, Galit.
So I just have to ask Erik if all the things that Natasha just said, do they ease your pain regarding what Bayer does or doesn't do with regard to sustainability? because I, of course, understand what you're saying. It's the mere business of a buyer is toxic chemicals, but what can they do otherwise?
I would love to advise buyer on strategic level, but we don't have enough time. Look, I think it all depends on the intention by which these initiatives are launched. And, you know, if they're truly transformative initiatives that does not extend a life or actually double down on the existing very destructive practices of the way that we have, actually created, destroyed our planet, biodiversity, biosphere, human health as well as plays a huge role. And I think, with the consciousness of what we know now, I think that we all, including, the existing structures and the existing players, have a duty to play into a different game and to change and really challenge some of the existing business models, however solid and huge they might be, and really go in and look at ourselves and said, do we really see a real future in 10, 15, 20 years on a planet that has no biodiversity? And how can we begin to reverse that? I think there's a bigger picture that goes way beyond organizations and our own selfish interests. And we really have to challenge ourselves on that one. It's super hard. It's not easy. It's a journey that takes, in the old economy would take decades, that we are asking companies, governments, and civic society to do in a few years. And that really means that the big system players need to be on board. In Denmark, for instance, we've just had a new climate farm bill introduced in Parliament, and it's hailed as the most progressive in the world. Is it enough? No, it's not by far enough, because we have a real systemic problem in Denmark. We have 95% of our agriculture dedicated to animal protein. And that in the big, systemic play is a real problem for this country strategically. But even the big players in that space are getting to the realization that they need to divest their portfolio, because there is a mega trend only going one way. And even you're seeing perhaps the collapse of animal agriculture altogether, as technology is providing, and in Israel, you're leading on this, are trading lab protein and the development proteins in factories way more efficient than anything that animal agriculture can provide. It's actually a big beacon of hope, but it means that a lot of the industrial complex will collapse within a few years. And I think the players within that system needs to begin to realize the bigger picture and how strategically to navigate the value for shareholders into a different system. And that's what I'm talking about. And that is the systemic level that we all need to get to if we even going to begin to change and deliver on those, carbon targets. So right now, what we're looking at is that we are trying to deliver on targets, which is we don't agree on the measurement of. So we don't know which currency carbon takes. Are we trading yen? Are we talking dollars? Are we talking euros? Because carbon is the inhaling and exhaling of the world. And at what time do we actually measure carbon is the question. And Microsoft has actually done a really good piece of work in their internal targets. They say they're only doing carbon cycles whereby the carbon stays in the ground, locked in for at least 1,000 years. And that is the carbon they will apply to their measurement stick.
Okay.
Can I quickly just add, but just so as we are recording, just quickly from our side, just to add some of the comments. I think we are more like-minded than Erik thinks, and I hope he visits a bit our commitments, and I invite him to reach out to me anytime so we can discuss some of the things that he mentioned here today. So we are more like-minded that he believes. I think, as I mentioned, the principle of investment in sustainable agriculture for us is that we address the three pillars, that we think about the trade-offs, that we have bold commitments, that we think about system transformation, but we make sure that those are tailored to local realities. So I don't believe there is a one size fits all. I think with innovation and with investment in innovation, we really can achieve sustainability at the ground, making sure that the system transformation is inclusive, but making sure it's bold enough to deal with the challenge that we have as human beings, and the challenge particularly in climate change and biodiversity loss.
I want to move to George, but first let me just say my point of view as as a lawyer, which represents many startups in Cleantech, but also polluters. And we all the emissions are the problem of everyone, but sometimes reducing emissions by a very big corporation that deal with the sustainability and implements mitigation to climate change is much more efficient and has much more impact than all the startups and cleantechs that do small things. Sometimes this should be the way to.
Yeah, definitely. That's why we have those public commitments that are linked to our board of management compensation. So that's I think multinationals and big corporations need to have bold commitments, as I mentioned on my first answer. So completely in line.
Okay, so we will move to George. George, we were talking. You're the representative of the private business sector of investment. And how do you see the collaboration of different sectors, the private, the business, the investors, the government? What should they do together, and what is their role that the government should do?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's going to have their own opinion on what the government should or should not be doing. And I mean, from my perspective, for what it's worth, I don't necessarily have a strong opinion on the way a government should be acting. I think the role that we play on the investment side is to more try to read the tea leaves related to what direction is a government going, and try to be preemptive related to that. Because if a legislative or regulatory shift happens in this industry, it does take time. But if you get those tailwinds, then that can really shift an entire industry. And that's happening in agriculture, that's happening in hydrogen as well. I think one area to look at for hydrogen is related to, because that's one where it's going to require massive investment over the next, let's say, 25 years. It's going to require about $11 trillion worth of global investment to create this new economy, this new fuel source, not only transitioning our existing production, but also building an entire infrastructure around the utilization and the end products to actually use the hydrogen. And so a lot of that is driven by big governmental shifts towards investing in that agriculture, and then the private sector follows and doubles down. And so I think that's an area where we're seeing a lot of interest and are following the kind of, in some ways, the government lead, because it's such a massive investment that's required that you need that regulatory shift to happen first. On the agriculture space, I think it's there's potentially more entrenchment globally related to the way things are, the status quo. And so you see not necessarily just a governmental shift, but you see consumer shifts, which then cause multinationals to then put pressure. I think for us, it's really just about following the money in some ways, because that's what really is going to elicit the change. Is how can you maintain some level of profitability or even increase your profitability while still pushing towards more sustainable practices. I think that's kind of been seen as there's like almost a false dichotomy between choosing one or the other. You can have both, and so from a governmental perspective in agriculture, of course, we're seeing a lot more regulatory changes towards stronger utilization or pushes towards sustainability. And then I guess one last comment on the agriculture side is that because we're in a global ecosystem, whatever it's basically a weak chain system where like whatever the Europe says, if you want to sell in Europe and you're growing in Brazil, you're going to have to follow the European practices if you want to sell your product in Brazil. So it's not just a local government perspective. There's a very global perspective here as well. So yeah, I think that's just something to consider, and you have to be on that leading edge and not necessarily try to fight it. You have to identify it and then use that as a tailwind to invest in the things that are going to enable those changes. Yeah.
Okay, and it's something that you said in your comment that the public, maybe the generation, the millennials, the Z generation, they have also they have other demands than the ones before, and they demand more sustainable production of agriculture and everything. They demand sustainability as part of the new world that we're shaping, right? So it's something that you take into account in your investments as well.
Yeah, of course. I think that's one of the key things is, you just have to answer the question, like, what is going to be driving the change? Is it going to be a governmental shift, a regulatory shift, and or consumer shift? And of course, I think in being in the agriculture space naturally lends itself to thinking about the end consumer and kind of the industry changes and their perspectives and what they're, let's take a specific example. If you take alternative meats and you say, all right, in order for alternative meats to be empowered, they're going to need higher protein content bees. So then you see that trickle down all the way down to a Brazilian grower who was previously growing bees for cattle to transition to higher quality human grade pea protein production. And so you're trying to identify those trends and then see how the trickle down happens and then invest in the enablers of that.
Okay, so before we finish, I would like to ask each of you to refer to the same question, which is, what is your prediction? How do you see the future for the next 10 years in aspects of climate change and sustainability in agriculture? How do you see your organization integrates in such prediction? So let's begin with Natasha.
Thank you, Galit. I think we discussed it today a little bit about that. So I think it's bold commitments, it's transparent, it's investing on the goals that you put it together in terms of agriculture. For us, is climate neutral future for agriculture, meaning the system of agriculture, not only us as a industrial player, but really our contribution into the agriculture system. It's inclusive, so we make sure we leave no one behind. That's related to our 100 million farmers. Empowerment objectives, that is the public commitments, and make sure we walk the talk. So we can always engage on those conversations and have proof points of advancing in the future that we want for sustainable agriculture.
Okay, George?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I'd say realistically, in 10 years, I guess in 10 years time, you're just going to see the things that we already see today that are smaller, but they're going to have gained massive adoption. And so I'd say that that's especially on the things related to precision in the field. So using less and getting more effective with it, new products that are driven towards more sustainability, more sustainable production. I think we'll have a lot more. I think that I've taken away from Natasha and Erik is related to the way things are measured. And if we don't have necessarily a full clarity on the standards for measurement of specific pieces, then you can't actually relate things. And so I'd hope within these 10 years, we'll have a lot more clarity related to the measurement and the quantification of these different sustainable goals and widespread adoption of that. And we'll see a lot of the things that we're investing in today coming to fruition.
Okay, and Erik?
I think the North Star for what we're trying to achieve within the fund and where we should be really looking are 3 buckets, if you may, in investments when it comes to ag, especially in food. One is alternative proteins and intermodal, so transport, mechanics. The second one is drawdown and biodiversity. And the third one, circular system design. those three buckets for now provide some kind of clarity on the streams that we need to be aiming at. Within those streams, it's really hard to predict what's going to win out. And we know from previous decades that we're in a race for standards as well. So, so that's kind of one of the lenses I would put on, you know, what's likely to be the standard. But also I'll also see the new Green Deal or the Green Deal framework, you know, and the European Commission now putting into European and national law as a really good policy framework indication of where we should be creating the values in the years to come.
Okay, thank you very much. It was really a very good talk that we had. I feel like that. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for these fascinating perspectives. And now for our final two companies in this competition. You remember how it works, right? The companies give their pitch, and you vote in the poll on your screen.